Hey, what is up everybody, and welcome back to another video. In this video I was going to talk a little bit about actually a video my friend the Lanky Cyclist made. I'm going to link that right here, and if you want to pause this video and watch that one first, you can, but it'll also be linked below. Basically in his video though, he was kind of going by the theory, or explaining the theory that you only need two bikes, and he was saying a gravel bike and a fat bike will cover pretty much most people's needs. To which I would say, of course, that's not true, because sometimes your main vintage bike isn't working, so you need a backup for that. And with all the problems you could have with vintage bikes, it's nice to have a backup for that one. And then if you don't feel like reaching to down tube shifters, you kind of want a neo retro build, so you could ride on STIs on your vintage bike and it still looks cool. Obviously I'm joking, even though that's the way I do live my life. But anyways, his video just got me to thinking about, like, what could I really pare my bikes down to, drop my pen, if I wanted to, and what would I recommend that, in my opinion, other people need that ride bikes a lot, you know, your cycling enthusiast, if you will. The gravel bike to me really is that Swiss Army knife, and I think a lot of people could get by with just that bike. My friend Kyle was getting back into riding, and he was a lot like me when I did. He just had his old mountain bike from high school. That's kind of what he rode around. But he has a little bit of money, wanted a nicer bike, and when he called me on the phone, I was like, I would get a gravel bike, you know, and I recommended a couple he go down to Dirty River and try out. That's what he did. He found the one that he likes, and it's great. You know, you could ride it like a road bike, you know, but you could be in a more comfortable position on the hoods. You know, it just pretty much covers so much territory. A lot of us though do way more than that, and like Lanky says in his video, his fat bike fills in some of the harder mountain biking he does, and a harder, rougher terrain mountain biking he does, and then serves as his winter bike. I think that makes a lot of sense. Personally for me, since I ride almost everywhere from home, the fat bike isn't going to fill that void. So I like to have, you know, I use my vintage mountain bike with studded tires as my winter bike, and I don't do a ton of serious mountain biking, so I don't need that. He does caveat his video with, if you're really big into mountain biking, you're probably gonna have a couple specialized mountain bikes, at least for that. So, and he also caveats it with, if you're a racer, you're obviously gonna have a road bike. Or, you know, more of a modern race bike. For me though, I still think I would need at least 3 bikes because I do like having still kind of a road bike. And mine is a vintage, it's a Schwinn Peloton from '86, but then it's upgraded with 9-speed Dura-Ace, so relatively modern shifting. And I like having that. Yes, the gravel bike can fill that spot of a road bike, and I ride my gravel bike like an endurance road bike all the time. I have PRs on that bike and everything on smooth roads, but I just do sometimes like the feeling of a fast, climby road bike, and I still kind of want to have one in the arsenal. I don't think most people need that high-end carbon race bike. I mean, if you have the money and that's what you want, cool. Most people don't need to ride in that position. Most people don't need to ride something that expensive. It's not going to make that much difference if you're not trying to win the Giro d'Italia. But I've always said this about like a road bike with its geometry, even like on my end of the spectrum, something that's older and not super lightweight. It's just feeling fast is fast, and sometimes you want that. You know you're going out on that kind of terrain. You know you might do some, you know, something climby on smooth surfaces. So for me, I don't think I could give up some kind of road bike. And the bike that I ride to tour on flat, smooth surfaces too is a vintage road bike that's upgraded with modern components. I love having that bike. But again, I could totally forego that and tour on my gravel bike if I wanted to. Every time I tour with my good buddy Ben, he's always riding his all-city Gorilla Monsoon. It totally fills in that gap. So I totally do understand like the gravel bike taking the place of the road bike and all that. I would also say though that some people commute, and I don't think they would want to. A lot of people don't want to use their main gravel bike as their commuter. One, not everybody, you know, a commuter bike is going to have full fenders. Here in where we live in Ohio, you're going to want something for the snow, so studded tires or something like that, especially if your commutes are longer. You know, a fat bike would not be practical for that. So I would have to caveat his video with, commuters are going to need a commuter bike. Another bike that I would talk about too though is what the British call a pub bike. A lot of us, if we're gonna ride out, we're gonna meet people at restaurants, you're gonna be out at bars, You know, obviously none of this is happening now, but in normal times, if I'm gonna change something up in a place where there's some dive bars, I don't want it to be my gravel bike always sitting outside there in the evening with, you know, mine's not even that expensive, but I think a lot of people we know have, you know, you got your carbon wheels and you got a nice bike, and if it looks nice, you don't want it sitting outside of a bar for 2 or 3 hours. So I think the pub bike is definitely a bike that I would want in the arsenal. That, to me, I like vintage bikes. I have some cheaper ones, so those fill in that gap right there. And again, they're not very expensive. If you don't want them to be, you know, that's the point of a pub bike. Yeah, I guess so. For me, I'm already at 4 bikes with the winter bike, the pub bike, the gravel bike, and the road bike. I think that would be as low as I would want to go. I also do understand what he's saying in his video, putting all your resources into just a couple bikes and making them as nice as possible. I think of that sometimes with even tires, you know, having a bunch of bikes and having to have, you know, always buy a set of tires for every single bike. That kind of stuff adds up, and where if I didn't do that, those resources could be put into another bike more than that, which is a good reason for his argument. He also talks about the bike fit and having 2 bikes that just fit with the saddles he likes, and that all makes sense. You know, I find that I'm able to fit my diverse array of bikes to myself, but you know, that's also just a personal preference, and I couldn't really take issue with his point there either. Yeah, he's definitely on point with the idea of living where we do. You could get by with a gravel bike for a lot of mountain biking and the fat bike for what you don't. I have kind of this 90%, 10% rule though. There's a lot of times where I'm riding with people and they're like, well, if you had, you know, a fat bike, or if you had even a gravel bike that could take wider tires, you'd be more comfortable with what we're riding right now. And for me, they're right in that moment, but a lot of times we have already ridden 10 miles to get to that trail that's a little rough. So being a little bit underbiked and just having to be a better bike handler, or having to once in a while put a foot down, isn't the end of the world, because it made my, like I said, 90% of the ride more enjoyable. And so I would rather lean to what I'm going to be riding the most than what I'm going to be riding the least. And so I think that's another caveat to add. If you ride from home or you ride from work all the time, then you're definitely going to want more bikes than someone who puts their bikes on a rack and drives to where they're going to ride. And that's not a negative. I'm not saying anything negative about people who do that. It's just a different perspective then. If your bike's not always going to be chained up somewhere, if it's always going to be just going to the train you're trying to ride, that changes the whole equation. Anyways, I thought his video was really interesting. Like I said, it's not, you know, this isn't truly a counterpoint or a disagreement, even though I have a stupid amount of bikes just because I do like them. I am someone who is naturally a collector. I have a bunch of cameras. I have a bunch of bikes. I'm trying not to acquire any more bikes anymore, and I've actually sold a couple of the vintage bikes to people who are actually going to ride them. But there are a couple sentimental ones that I keep around and I ride when I, you know, the mood strikes me to be on one of those classic bikes. Would love to know what everybody else thinks about this. Again, check out his video, get into the comments over there, leave some comments over here, and I will see you in the next one.